The smell hits Private Elliot Brennan before he sees her face. It's August 1945, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. 3 months since Germany surrendered. The war in Europe is over, but the cleanup has just begun. Thousands of German prisoners are being moved across the Atlantic, sorted, interrogated, assigned to labor details while the Allies figure out what to do with them. The transport truck rolls through the gates just after dawn. 70 men inside, exhausted, relieved to have survived. But one prisoner in the back doesn't look relieved. Brennan is working the medical screening station. He's processed 300 prisoners this week alone. Check for lice, look for open sores, take a temperature, move them through. It's routine work, tedious, but necessary. The prisoners file past him one by one. Young men mostly, boys really, hollow-eyed and silent. They answer his questions in broken English or not at all. He doesn't push. He just checks the boxes and waves them through. Then she steps forward. Brennan doesn't know it's a she, not yet. He just knows something is wrong. The prisoner keeps her head down, cap pulled low, uniform too large, Wehrmacht tunic hanging off narrow shoulders, like a child wearing their father's coat. She moves slowly, every step deliberate, like walking costs her something. Next, Brennan calls. She doesn't move fast enough. The guard behind her nudges her forward, not rough, just impatient. Brennan holds out his hand for her paperwork. She fumbles with the documents. Her hands are shaking. He takes the papers and glances at them. Ernst Müller, private, 19th Infantry, age 19. Arm, Brennan says in German. She hesitates. I need to check for wounds, he says. Standard procedure. She extends her left arm, slowly, like she's afraid of what he'll find. Brennan reaches for her sleeve. She pulls back too hard. Instinct, fear. He frowns. I'm not going to hurt you. She doesn't believe him. But she lets him roll up the sleeve anyway. That's when he sees it. 2 wounds, deep, infected, the edges ragged and swollen, the surrounding skin hot and red. The smell intensifies, old blood, pus, tissue breaking down. Brennan has seen combat injuries, bullet wounds, shrapnel, burns, frostbite. He knows what war does to a body, but these wounds are different. They weren't caused by bullets or bombs. They're puncture wounds, narrow, deliberate, made by something sharp. How did this happen? He asks. Silence. He looks closer. There's another wound higher up, on the shoulder, partially hidden by the tunic. How many more? He asks. She stares at the ground. Brennan turns to the guard. I need the camp doctor, now. The guard looks annoyed. Is it serious? These wounds are weeks old. She should be dead. The guard catches the pronoun. She. Brennan realizes his mistake. He looks at the prisoner again. Really looks, the way she holds herself, the angle of her jaw, the shape of her hands. Get Captain Walsh, Brennan says quietly, and tell him to bring Nurse Callahan. Captain Benjamin Walsh has been a doctor for 23 years. He's treated everything from appendicitis to pneumonia to third-degree burns. He landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day and worked in field hospitals across France and Germany. He's seen men torn apart by artillery. He's watched boys die from infections that could have been cured with antibiotics if they'd reached him 12 hours earlier. He thought he'd seen everything, but when he walks into the examination room and sees the prisoner sitting on the metal table, he knows immediately that something is off. The body language is wrong. The way the prisoner holds herself, the way she avoids eye contact, the way her hands tremble when he asks her to remove the tunic. Walsh tells the guard to step outside. The guard hesitates. Walsh gives him a look. The guard leaves. Nurse Ruth Callahan stays. She's 42, from Tennessee. She's been with the Army Nurse Corps since 1943. She's calm, professional. She's seen enough to know when to stay quiet and when to speak. I need to examine the wounds, Walsh says in German. Can you take off the tunic? The prisoner nods. She unbuttons it slowly, carefully, Like every movement hurts. When the tunic comes off, Walsh counts 7 distinct wounds. 2 on the left forearm, 1 on the shoulder, 3 across the ribs, 1 near the hip. None of them are from bullets, none from shrapnel. They're puncture wounds, deep, made by something like a bayonet tip or a sharpened rod. The edges are ragged, infected. The surrounding tissue is red and swollen. Some of the wounds are leaking pus. The infection has spread beneath the skin. If it reaches the bloodstream, the prisoner will die. Walsh steps back. He looks at Ruth. She's already figured it out. "This prisoner is female," Ruth says quietly. Walsh nods. He looks at the prisoner again. 18, maybe 19 years old, hair cut short and uneven, face gaunt from hunger, but unmistakably a girl. "What's your name?" Walsh asks. No answer. "Your real name," Walsh says gently. There's a long silence. Then, barely audible, she speaks. "Margaret." Walsh pulls up a stool. He sits down so he's at eye level with her. "Margaret, I need to treat these wounds. Some of them are badly infected. This is going to hurt. But if I don't clean them, the infection will spread. Do you understand?" She nods. "Can you tell me how this happened?" She shakes her head. Walsh doesn't push, he just starts working. He drains each wound one by one, flushes them with antiseptic, packs them with gauze. The pain must be excruciating. But Margaret makes no sound. She sits perfectly still, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on the wall. Ruth watches her face. She's seen this before, in other prisoners. The look of someone who has learned that showing pain only makes things worse. When Walsh finishes, he washes his hands and turns back to Margaret. "You'll need to stay in the camp hospital for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. The infection needs time to clear." Margaret shakes her head. "You don't have a choice," Walsh says. "If you go back to the barracks, you'll die." "I won't go back," Margaret says. Her voice is flat, final. Walsh understands. "You won't be sent back to the men's barracks, I promise." Margaret looks at him for the first time, searching his face for deception. "I promise," Walsh says again. She nods slowly. Ruth brings her a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. They're standard issue, but they fit. It's the first time since 1944 that Margaret has worn clothing that wasn't stolen or scavenged. "Thank you," Margaret says quietly. Ruth doesn't smile. She just nods. She's seen too much to offer false comfort. But there's something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or solidarity. Lieutenant Patrick Coleman has conducted 437 prisoner interviews since the war ended. He knows how to read people. He knows when someone is hiding something. He knows the difference between fear and guilt, between trauma and deception. When he sits down across from Margaret in the hospital ward the next day, he sees all of it at once. She's afraid, but not of him. She's afraid of what he'll uncover. She's traumatized, but not from combat, from something else, something worse. Coleman is 36. He has a daughter back home in Pennsylvania. She's 17, only a year younger than Margaret. That fact sits heavy in his chest as he opens his notebook. "I'm not here to hurt you," Coleman says. "I'm here to understand what happened, that's all." Margaret says nothing. Coleman tries a different approach. "How old were you when the war started?" She hesitates, then answers. 12. "Where were you?" "Saxony, a small village." He writes this down, then closes the notebook. "That's enough for today. I'll come back tomorrow." Margaret looks surprised. She expected more questions, more pressure. But Coleman knows better. Trust takes time. The second interview happens 3 days later. Margaret's wounds are healing. The swelling has gone down. Ruth has been changing the dressings twice a day. The infection is retreating. Coleman sits in the same chair, same calm demeanor. "Tell me about your family," he says. Margaret is quiet for a long moment. Then she speaks. My father was conscripted in 1940. He never came back. And your mother? Died in a bombing raid, 1943. Brothers? Sisters? A younger brother, Klaus. He was sent to a Hitler youth camp in 1944. I never saw him again. Coleman nods. He doesn't react, just keeps his voice steady. What happened after your mother died? I was alone. How old? 16. What did you do? Margaret's jaw tightens. I survived. Coleman doesn't push. He closes the notebook again. Thank you. We'll talk more tomorrow. The third interview is a week after her arrival. Margaret is sitting up now, reading a book Ruth gave her. She looks stronger, but still guarded. How did you survive? Coleman asks. After your mother died, after Klaus was taken. Margaret sets down the book. I had no ration card, no identity papers. I lived in a burned-out building, scavenging. For how long? Months, through the winter of 1943 into 1944. And then, I made a choice. Coleman leans forward slightly. What choice? I cut my hair. I stole a uniform from a dead soldier. I joined a labor battalion. Why? It was the only way to survive. Coleman writes this down. How long did you serve? 8 months? Building fortifications, digging trenches. And no one discovered you? I kept my distance. I worked harder than anyone. I never spoke unless necessary. I bound my chest. I avoided the showers. I survived. Coleman nods. Until someone found out. Margaret's hands clench. I need to know who did this to you, Coleman says. These wounds, they weren't caused by combat. Margaret looks at him. Her expression is cold, hard. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because what happened to you was a crime. Margaret almost laughs. It's a bitter sound. You think anyone will care? Coleman doesn't flinch. I care. There's a long silence. Then Margaret speaks. One word, quiet, final. Kameraden. The fourth interview happens 2 days later. This time, Margaret tells him everything. After the surrender, we were taken to a holding camp near the French border. Temporary facility, just tents and barbed wire. They searched us, checked our papers. Someone discovered I wasn't who I claimed to be. How? I don't know. Maybe someone saw me changing. Maybe I made a mistake. The word spread. Fast. What happened? The first night, a group of men came to my tent. 6 of them, maybe more. They said I had disgraced the army, that I deserved to be punished. Coleman's pen stops. What did they do? Margaret's voice drops, but it doesn't waver. They held me down. They used bayonets, not to kill, just to mark. 7 wounds, 1 for each man, then they left. And the guards? American guards came to the fence. They stood there, watching. I could see them. One had a cigarette. They stayed for a few minutes, then they walked away. Coleman feels something cold settle in his chest. They didn't stop it. No. Or did they say anything? I heard one of them. He said, "Not our problem. Let them sort it out." Coleman closes his notebook. He sits back. For a moment, he can't speak. "I'm sorry," he finally says. And he means it. Coleman spends the next 2 days tracking down the other prisoners from that transport. Most won't talk, but 2 of them do, Heinrich and Werner, both in their early 20s, both exhausted and eager to cooperate. Coleman interviews them separately. Their stories match. There was a girl in the holding camp. Someone figured out she wasn't male. The word spread. A group of men decided she needed to be punished, not killed, just marked, scarred, made an example of. The attacks happened at night. The guards heard. They came to the fence. They watched. Then they walked away. "Did you try to stop it?" Coleman asks Werner. Werner looks down. "No." "Why not?" "I was afraid." Coleman writes his report that night. He's meticulous. He names the suspects. He describes the wounds. He includes testimony from Heinrich and Werner. He recommends a full criminal investigation. 3 days later, he gets his answer. No investigation, no charges, no witnesses willing to testify on record, no physical evidence, no political will to reopen wounds between former enemies. Case closed. Coleman sits in his office for a long time. He thinks about his daughter back home. He thinks about how the system is supposed to protect people and how it fails them every single day. He goes to the hospital that evening. Margaret is sitting up in bed, reading. "I'm sorry," Coleman says. "The investigation was denied. There won't be any charges." Margaret nods. She expected this. "For what it's worth," Coleman says, "I believe you. What happened to you was not justice. It was torture, and you didn't deserve it." Margaret looks at him, really looks. "Thank you for trying." Coleman leaves his personal file on her case, sealed in an envelope, just in case. Someday, maybe, someone will care enough to read it. Margaret spends her first night in the storage room near the hospital. It's not much. A cot, a wool blanket, a small window that lets in moonlight. But it has something she hasn't had in over a year, a lock on the inside of the door. She lies awake for hours, listening, waiting for footsteps, for voices, for the sound of someone trying to get in, but nothing comes, just silence. And slowly, as dawn breaks, she allows herself to believe that maybe, for now, she's safe. The wounds take time to heal. The infection retreats slowly, painfully. The swelling goes down. The tissue begins to close. Ruth changes the dressings twice a day. She works efficiently, gently, never asking questions, never offering pity, just doing her job with quiet competence. And somehow, that's exactly what Margaret needs. By the third day, Margaret asks if she can help. Small tasks at first. Rolling bandages, organizing supplies, carrying trays to bedridden patients. Ruth considers the request, then nods. "If you feel strong enough." Margaret moves quietly through the hospital ward, a ghost in clean clothes. The other nurses notice her. They whisper, but Ruth shuts it down fast. She's a patient. She's recovering. That's all you need to know. They don't ask again. One afternoon, Ruth brings Margaret a stack of books from the camp library, old novels, poetry, a worn copy of Grimm's fairy tales. "I thought you might want something to read," Ruth says. Margaret takes them carefully, like they might break. "Thank you." "Do you like to read?" "I used to." Margaret pauses. "Before everything changed," Ruth nods. She understands that before and after are the only two time periods that matter now. "Well, now you can again." That night, Margaret opens the fairy tales. She reads about girls who disguise themselves to survive, about transformations and curses and impossible tasks, about magic that saves and darkness that kills. She wonders if there's a story about a girl with 7 wounds. Probably not. Those kinds of stories don't have happy endings. Lieutenant Coleman returns to the hospital on the 4th day. Not officially, the investigation is dead, but he can't let it go. Something about this case sits wrong in his chest, like a splinter he can't dig out. Margaret is sitting on the cot when he arrives, reading. She closes the book and sets it aside. "I'm not here officially," Coleman says. "I just want to understand. If you're willing to talk." Margaret studies him, weighing his words, looking for deception. "What do you want to know?" "How you survived, how you managed to hide for 8 months. What made you think you could?" She's quiet for a long moment. Then she speaks, but not much, just pieces. "I was 12 when the war started, old enough to understand, young enough to think it wouldn't touch us." "Where were you?" "Saxony, a small village. My father worked in a factory. My mother taught at the village school. My brother Klaus was 8. Coleman writes this down. What happened to them? But Margareta shakes her head. Not today. Coleman nods. He understands. Trust takes time. All right. We'll talk again, if you want. Why do you care? Margareta asks. Coleman thinks of his daughter back home, 17, safe. Because someone should. The second interview happens 3 days later. Margaret has been thinking, processing, deciding how much to share, how much to keep locked away. This time, when Coleman sits down, she speaks first. My father was conscripted in 1940. They said it would be 3 months, maybe 6. He never came back. Coleman listens, pen ready, but he doesn't write yet, just listens. In 1941, we got a letter. Missing, presumed dead. My mother tried to keep things normal. She kept teaching. She kept us fed. But everything was falling apart. The rations got smaller. The work got harder. The bombs got closer. Margaret's voice stays steady. Flat, like she's reading from a script she's memorized too many times. In October 1943, the sirens went off in the middle of the night. We ran to the shelter. But my mother went back. She said she forgot something, I don't know what. The building took a direct hit. I waited for hours, but she never came. Coleman writes slowly, carefully. He wants to get every word right. What about your brother? Klaus. He was 10. After Mother died, it was just us. We lived in what was left of the apartment building. Half the roof was gone. No heat, no running water. We survived by scavenging. Food from the rubble. Clothes from abandoned buildings, anything we could find. How long did you survive like that? 3 months. Then in early 1944, the Hitler Youth came for Klaus. They said all boys his age had to report for training. I tried to hide him, but they found him. They took him to a camp. Margaret's jaw tightens. I never saw him again. Did you search for him? Yes, the Red Cross, the registries. But there's no record. He's just gone. Coleman closes his notebook. That's enough for today. He can see the weight of these memories pressing down on her. Thank you for telling me. Margaret nods. She picks up her book. The conversation is over. The third interview happens 5 days later. By now, a pattern has formed. Coleman comes in the afternoon. He sits. He asks one question, and Margareta decides how much to answer. Today he asks about 1944. After Klaus was taken, what did you do? Margareta sets down her book. She's been expecting this question. I had nothing. No family, no papers, no ration card. Winter was coming. I knew I wouldn't survive on the streets. So you joined the army. I made a decision. Survival required transformation.
Coleman leans forward slightly. How did you do it? I found a dead soldier in the rubble. His uniform was mostly intact. I took it. I cut my hair with a piece of broken glass. I practiced walking differently, talking differently. I practiced until I could do it without thinking. And then I went to a recruitment station. They were desperate, taking anyone who could hold a shovel. Old men, boys, anyone. They didn't look closely. They just needed bodies. I gave them a name.
Ernst Müller, age 17. They wrote it down, and just like that, I became a soldier. Coleman writes carefully. What was it like, being in the unit? Terrifying. Every single moment, I was afraid someone would notice, that I'd make a mistake, that someone would see through the disguise. What did you do to avoid discovery? I bound my chest with strips of cloth. I wore the uniform loose. I kept my distance from everyone. I never undressed in front of anyone. I avoided the latrines when others were there. I worked harder than anyone else. If you work hard enough, people leave you alone. Did anyone suspect? Margaret considers this. Maybe. But no one said anything. The work was brutal. Digging trenches, building fortifications, hauling supplies. 12 hours a day, sometimes more. People were dying from exhaustion, from hunger, from the cold. No one cared about anything except making it to the next day. And you survived for 8 months.
Yes, Until Germany surrendered. Coleman nods. He closes his notebook, but he doesn't leave. Not yet. You did what you had to do. You survived. That took courage. Margaret looks at him. Really looks. It wasn't courage. It was desperation. Maybe, but you're still here. That counts for something. The fourth interview happens a week later. This is the one Coleman has been dreading. The one Margaret has been avoiding. He sits down. He doesn't open his notebook right away.
He just asks quietly, what happened after the surrender? Margaret takes a long breath. She's been preparing for this, rehearsing the words in her mind, making them clinical, detached, because if she lets herself feel it, she won't be able to say it at all. Chaos, complete chaos. We were rounded up, herded into holding camps, temporary facilities, just open fields with tents and barbed wire fencing. No organization, no privacy. They searched us, took our weapons, checked our papers.
Where was this? Near the French border. I don't know the exact location, just a field, with hundreds of prisoners, maybe thousands. What happened there? Margaret's hands clench, but her voice stays steady. They checked identities, searched uniforms. There was no place to hide, no place to be alone. Someone discovered I wasn't who I claimed to be. I don't know who, I don't know how. Maybe someone saw me changing, maybe I made a mistake, maybe someone just guessed.
But the word spread fast. Coleman opens his notebook now. This is the part he needs to document. When did the attacks start? The first night, a group of men came to my tent after dark. 6 of them, maybe more. It was too dark to see clearly. What did they say? That I had disgraced the army, that I had lied, that I had tricked them into accepting me as one of them, that I deserved to be punished. Coleman's pen hovers over the page. What did they do? Margaret's voice drops, but it doesn't waver. They held me down. They used bayonets, not to kill, just to mark, to make sure I would carry the memory forever. They took turns, 1 wound for each man, 7 in total, then they left. Did this happen more than once? 3 nights. The second night, fewer men came, 3 or 4. They reopened some of the wounds, made new ones. The third night, only 2. But by then, the infection had set in. I could barely move. Coleman writes everything down, his hand steady, even though his chest feels tight. Were there guards present? American guards, yes. Did they intervene? No. They came to the fence. They stood there, watching. I could see their silhouettes against the lights. One of them was smoking. They stayed for a few minutes. Then they walked away. Did you hear them say anything? I don't speak much English, but I understood enough. One of them said something to the other about paperwork, about not wanting to deal with separating a female prisoner, about letting us sort it out ourselves. Coleman stops writing. He looks up at her. American guards watched this happen and did nothing. Yes. He sits back, silent, processing. Finally, he speaks. I'm sorry, this should never have happened and our guards should have stopped it. But they didn't. No, they didn't. Margaret meets his eyes. Are you going to do anything about it? Coleman wants to say yes. He wants to promise justice, investigation, accountability, but he can't lie to her. I'm going to try, but I can't promise anything. I know, Margaret says. No one ever promises anything. Coleman spends the next 2 days tracking down other prisoners from that transport. Most refuse to talk, but 2 agree. Heinrich Vogel and Werner Baumann, both in their early 20s, both exhausted and cooperative. Coleman interviews them separately. Their stories match. Yes, there was a girl in the holding camp. Yes, someone discovered her identity. Yes, a group of men attacked her. Yes, it happened over multiple nights. Yes, the American guards knew. No, they didn't intervene. No, Heinrich and Werner didn't participate. No, they didn't try to stop it. Why not? Coleman asks Werner. Werner looks down at his hands. I was afraid. If I intervened, they might have turned on me. It sounds cowardly, but that's the truth. Coleman writes everything down. He builds the case methodically. Names, dates, locations, testimonies. He identifies 5 suspects, all of them still in custody at various camps. He writes his report over 3 nights. Meticulous, detailed, professional. He recommends a full criminal investigation. He recommends disciplinary action for the guards who failed to intervene. He recommends immediate policy changes to prevent similar incidents. He submits the report to his commanding officer on a Tuesday morning. The rejection comes back Thursday afternoon. No investigation, insufficient evidence, no witnesses willing to testify on the record, no physical proof beyond the wounds themselves, no political will to prosecute German prisoners for crimes against other German prisoners. Case closed. Coleman sits in his office for a long time after reading the decision. He thinks about his daughter, Sarah, 17, back home in Pennsylvania, safe, going to school, living in a world that makes sense. He thinks about what would happen to her in a situation like this, whether anyone would fight for her, whether anyone would care. The system is supposed to protect people, but it fails them every single day. That evening, Coleman goes to the hospital. Margaret is sitting up in bed, reading the fairy tale book. She looks up when he enters. She can tell from his face what he's going to say. They denied the investigation, Coleman says. No charges will be filed, no disciplinary action. The case is closed. Margaret nods slowly. She expected this. Why did you try? You knew it wouldn't work. Because someone needed to. Because what happened to you was wrong, and someone needed to say it out loud. Does saying it change anything? No, but maybe someday it will matter. Maybe someday someone will read the file and care. Margaret closes her book. Thank you for trying. Coleman reaches into his jacket. He pulls out a sealed envelope. This is my personal copy of the investigation file. Everything, testimonies, evidence, names. I'm keeping it. If you ever need it, if you ever want to pursue this years from now, it'll exist. Margaret takes the envelope. She holds it carefully. What should I do with it? Whatever you want. Keep it. Burn it. Read it. It's yours. He stands to leave, but pauses at the door. For what it's worth, Lieutenant Brenner, I believe you. What happened to you wasn't justice, it was torture.
And you didn't deserve it. Margaret looks at him. What happens now? Now you heal, and then you go home. I don't have a home. Coleman doesn't have an answer for that. So he just nods and leaves. October 1945. Camp Shelby begins processing German prisoners for repatriation. The war is over. The cleanup continues. Thousands of men waiting to return to a country that barely exists anymore. Margaret is called to the administration office.
A tired clerk tells her she'll be on a transport ship leaving in 2 weeks. Destination, Bremerhaven. From there, processing through a displaced persons camp, then release. Will I be transported with the other prisoners? She asks. The clerk looks uncomfortable. You'll have separate quarters. We're arranging appropriate accommodations. Margaret understands. She's an administrative problem, a file that doesn't fit the categories. Ruth finds her that afternoon, sitting on the cot, staring at nothing. I heard you're leaving, Ruth says. 2 weeks. Ruth sits down beside her. They sit in silence for several minutes. Then Ruth reaches into her pocket. She pulls out a piece of paper and a pen. She writes something and hands it to Margaret. Ruth Callahan, 412 Maple Street, Knoxville, Tennessee, USA. That's my home address, Ruth says. If you ever need anything, if you ever want to write, if you just want someone to know you're still alive, write to me.
Margaret looks at the paper. Why? Because you deserve to know that someone cares, that someone remembers, that your life matters. Margaret folds the paper carefully. She puts it in her pocket. Thank you for everything. Ruth stands. She hesitates. Then she does something she hasn't done before. She puts her hand on Margaret's shoulder, just for a moment. Survive, Ruth says. That's all. Just keep surviving. December 1945. The cargo ship leaves New York Harbor at dawn. 200 German prisoners aboard. Most are men. But in a small cabin below deck, Margaret sits alone. The crossing takes 8 days. The Atlantic is rough. The ship rocks constantly. Most prisoners are seasick. Margaret stays in her cabin, eating little, sleeping less, thinking about what waits on the other side. On the 8th day, she goes up on deck. The coast of Germany is visible, grey, flat, dead-looking. Even from miles away, she can see the port is destroyed. An older prisoner stands near the rail, maybe 50, weathered face, tired eyes. Going home? He asks in German. Margaret doesn't answer immediately. Then, I don't have a home anymore. The man nods. None of us do. When the ship docks, Margaret walks down the gangplank. She steps onto German soil for the first time in 18 months. The port is a field of rubble, buildings collapsed, streets cratered, people moving through debris like ghosts. She has no money, no papers, no destination. But she's alive, and for now, that has to be enough. Leipzig, January 1946. The refugee shelter is a former school building, 3 stories, no windows, no heat. Over 200 people crammed into classrooms. Margaret is assigned a space in what used to be a chemistry classroom. 20 women share the room. They sleep on thin mats on the floor, pressed close for warmth. No one talks much. Everyone has lost something, someone, everything. But slowly connections form. A woman named Maria shares her bread. A woman named Anna brings extra blankets. A woman named Greta offers a worn coat. They don't ask each other's stories. The scars are visible. The grief is universal. Margaret wears long sleeves, always, even when it's warm. No one asks why. In February, Margaret finds work. A Catholic charity runs a makeshift clinic in a damaged church basement. They need someone who can clean wounds, distribute medicine, translate for American aid workers. Margaret volunteers. The work is hard, the conditions terrible, but it gives her something to do, a reason to wake up. The head of the clinic is Sister Agnes, 60 years old. She worked in hospitals before the war. You're good at this, Sister Agnes tells Margaret after the first week. You don't flinch, even with the worst wounds. I've seen worse, Margaret says. Sister Agnes doesn't ask for details. She just nods. Margaret works 6 days a week. Sundays, she volunteers at the Red Cross office, filing paperwork, updating registries, helping people search for missing relatives. It's there, on a Sunday in March 1946, that she meets him. His name is Franz Adler. 24 years old, tall, thin, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body has been broken and badly healed. He comes to the Red Cross office looking for his sister, Elsa Adler. Last seen in Berlin in 1945, he has a photograph, creased and worn. Margaret processes his request. She takes down the information. She checks the available registries. Nothing. I'll keep looking, she tells him. If anything comes up, I'll contact you. Do you have an address? Franz gives her the address of a boarding house near the railway station. He thanks her. He turns to leave. That's when Margaret reaches for a pen. Her sleeve pulls back, just for a moment. Franz sees the scar on her wrist. He stops. He doesn't say anything, but something passes across his face. Margaret pulls her sleeve down quickly. Franz meets her eyes. Siberia, he says quietly. Soviet labor camp. 3 years. I understand. Then he leaves.
Franz returns the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. He always has a reason, a new lead, a question, a form. But Margaret knows he's not just here for his sister. They start talking, small conversations, safe topics. Where are you from? What did you do before? Where are you staying? In April, Franz brings her a loaf of bread. From the bakery near my boarding house, they had extra. In May, he brings her a book, poems. I thought you might like it. In June, he asks if she'd like to take a walk. Margaret hesitates, then agrees. They walk along the Elster River. The banks are littered with debris, but the water still flows. Why do you keep coming back? Margaret asks. Franz is quiet. Then he says, because I see something in you that I recognize, and I don't want you to be alone with it. Margareta stops walking. She looks at him. I'm not ready to talk about it, she says. I know, Franz says. I'll wait. Over the following months, they meet every Sunday. Sometimes they walk. Sometimes they sit by the river. Sometimes they just exist in the same space. In September, Franz tells her about the Eastern Front, about being captured in 1942, about Siberia, the starvation, the cold, the men who died in their sleep. He doesn't tell her everything, just pieces. Margareta listens. She doesn't share her story yet. But she listens. In November, Franz finds work as a mechanic at the railway depot. He starts bringing Margareta small things. Gloves when winter comes, a scarf, a warm hat. You don't have to do this, she says. I know, he says. 1947. Franz continues searching for his sister, following leads, checking registries, writing letters to organizations across Germany. Margareta helps him, not because she has hope, but because it gives him something to hold on to. In March 1947, they receive a response from the Red Cross in Berlin. Records show that Elsa Adler died during the Soviet assault on Berlin, April 1945. Franz reads the letter sitting on a bench by the river. Margareta sits beside him. He doesn't cry, he just stares at the paper. I'm sorry, Margareta says. Franz nods. He folds the letter carefully. He puts it in his pocket. They sit in silence for a long time. Finally, Franz speaks. She was 16, just a girl. She shouldn't have been in Berlin, but our parents died in 1944. I was already a POW. She had nowhere else to go. It's not your fault, Margaret says. I know, but knowing doesn't help. Margaret understands that better than anyone. 1948. Franz stops searching. He focuses on work, on rebuilding, on surviving. He and Margaret continue meeting every Sunday. The conversations deepen, slowly, carefully. In summer 1948, Franz tells Margaret about Siberia in more detail, the labor camp, the punishments, the executions of prisoners who could no longer work. I watched men die every day, he says, and I couldn't do anything. I just had to keep working, keep surviving, and every day I survived felt like a betrayal. Margaret knows exactly what he means. 1949. 3 years since they met. In spring, Franz asks Margareta a question. Will you tell me your story? What happened to you during the war? Margaret is quiet for a long time. They're sitting by the river. The sun is setting. Then she begins to speak. She tells him about her family, about losing them one by one, about cutting her hair and joining the labor battalion, about the 8 months pretending to be someone else. She tells him about the surrender, about the holding camp, about the night someone discovered her secret. She tells him about the 3 nights, about the bayonets, about the 7 wounds. She doesn't cry, she doesn't apologize, she just tells him. When she finishes, Franz is quiet for a long time. Then he speaks, his voice steady. You did not deserve that. It was not your fault. And you are still here. Those words break something inside Margareta, not in a painful way, in a way that feels like release. For the first time since 1945, she believes maybe she deserves to live. In autumn 1949, Franz asks Margaret to marry him, not with grand gestures, just a simple question on a Sunday afternoon. I know we both carry things, he says, things we can't talk about easily, things that won't go away, but maybe we don't have to carry them alone. Margaret thinks for a long time. Then she says yes. They marry in early 1950. Small ceremony, no guests, just Sister Agnes as witness. The wedding is quiet, brief but real. 1954, Emma is born. A daughter with Franz's dark eyes and Margaret's stubborn jaw. Margaret works part-time at a public hospital now. Franz is a supervisor at the railway depot. They live in a small apartment near the clinic. Life is quiet, simple. But it's theirs. Emma grows up knowing little about the war. Margareta and Franz agree on this. The past is the past. Some things are too heavy to pass on. Emma asks about the scars once when she's 7. Margaret tells her she was hurt during the war. She doesn't say how. Emma doesn't ask again. The years continue. 1955, 1960, 1965. Margaret becomes a senior nurse at the hospital. Franz receives a promotion. Emma starts secondary school. She's smart, curious. She wants to be a teacher. Margareta never tells her that her grandmother was a teacher, or that she died in a bombing raid, or that her uncle disappeared, or that her grandfather was killed on the Eastern Front. She just tells Emma they were good people, and that they would have loved her. Autumn 1967. Margaret is 40 years old. Emma is 13. Franz is 45. They're sitting at dinner when the postman delivers a letter. International mail. From the United States. Forwarded through the Red Cross. Margaret opens it slowly. The handwriting is unfamiliar, but the signature makes her hands shake. Ruth Callahan. The letter is 2 pages. Handwritten. Ruth explains she's been searching for 22 years, Red Cross registries, displaced persons databases, hospital records. She never gave up. She says she kept a diary from Camp Shelby. She wrote about an 18-year-old German girl who arrived with 7 infected wounds, who sat perfectly still during treatment, who never cried, who thanked her for a clean shirt and a locked door. Ruth says she's thought about that girl every day since 1945. She's wondered if she survived, if she made it home, if she found family, if she built a life. She needs to know. Margaret's survival matters. Her life was worth saving. The letter ends. If you ever want to write back, I am here. You mattered then. You matter now. Margaret reads the letter 3 times. Franz watches her. Who is it from? The nurse. From the camp in Mississippi. She remembered. Franz reaches across the table. He takes Margaret's hand. That night, Margaret sits at the kitchen table. She takes out paper and pen, and she writes. She tells Ruth she survived, that she's alive, that she's married, that she has a daughter, that she works as a nurse, that she thinks about Camp Shelby sometimes, about the storage room with the inside lock, about the clean clothes, about the quiet kindness. She writes, "You saved my life, not just by treating the infection, but by treating me like a person. Thank you." She mails the letter the next day. 3 months later, another letter arrives. Ruth writes about her life in Tennessee, about the students she teaches, about the garden she tends, about the nights she still wakes up thinking about Camp Shelby. She asks questions. What is Emma like? What does Margaret do at the hospital? Does she still think about the war? And then at the end, Ruth writes something that changes everything. I'm retiring next year. I've been thinking about traveling, about seeing the places I only read about. Would it be possible to visit Leipzig? I would very much like to see you again, to know that you're truly well. Marguerite shows the letter to Franz. Do you want her to come? He asks. Marguerite thinks for a long time. Yes. Spring 1968. Ruth Callahan arrives in Leipzig. She's 63 now, grey hair, lines around her eyes. But when she steps off the train and sees Margareta waiting on the platform, something in her face breaks open. They stand facing each other for a moment. 23 years between them. Then Ruth opens her arms. Margaret steps forward. And for the first time since 1945, she lets herself be held. They don't say much at first. They don't need to. Later, at Margaret's apartment, Emma makes tea. Franz sits quietly. Ruth tells stories about Tennessee, about the school, about the life she built. I need you to know something, Ruth says to Margaret. That night at Camp Shelby, when I gave you the clean shirt and the locked room, I wasn't being kind, I was being decent. And the fact that decency felt like kindness tells you everything about what you'd been through. Margaret nods. It was enough. No, Ruth says. You deserved more. You deserved safety, protection, justice. But all I could give you was a clean shirt and a locked door. And I've carried that for 23 years. Margaret reaches across the table. She takes Ruth's hand. You gave me proof that I was still human, that I was still worth saving, and that was everything. Ruth stays for a week. She meets Sister Agnes. She visits the clinic. She walks with Margareta along the river. On her last day, they sit in Margareta's apartment. Emma is at school. Franz is at work. What will you do now? Ruth asks. Keep living, Margareta says. That's all. Just keep living, Ruth nods. That's enough. When Ruth leaves, Margareta watches from the window as the taxi pulls away. She feels something she hasn't felt in years. Not closure, not healing, but something close. Peace. 2 weeks later, Margaret tells Emma about the war. They're sitting in the living room. Emma is doing homework. Margareta is darning socks. Franz is reading. Emma, Margareta says, I want to tell you something. Emma looks up. Margareta sets down the socks. When I was your age, there was a war. I lost my family, all of them. I had to survive alone. I did things I'm not proud of. I saw things I wish I could forget, but I survived. Emma is quiet, listening. I've never talked about it because I didn't want you to carry what I carried. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe you deserve to know, not all of it, but enough to understand that survival is not about being strong. It's about being stubborn enough to wake up the next day. Emma reaches over. She takes her mother's hand. Thank you for telling me. Margaret nods. She doesn't say more. She doesn't need to. The next morning, Margaret goes to work. The hospital is busy. A young refugee girl is brought in. 15 years old, malnourished, infected wound on her arm. Margaret treats her. Gently, carefully, she sees herself at 18 in the girl's frightened eyes. When she finishes, she tells the girl, You're going to be fine. The infection will heal. You'll recover. The girl nods. She doesn't speak. Margaret understands. Sometimes survival is silent. And sometimes, years later, someone remembers, and that's enough. And epilogue. Camp Shelby, Mississippi, processed over 20,000 German prisoners of war between 1943 and 1946. Historical reports suggest that between 500 and 800 women disguised themselves as men to serve in German military forces during World War II. Most of their stories were never documented, their names were never recorded, Their sacrifices were never acknowledged. Margaret Keller's story is based on one of them. Sometimes survival is silent. Sometimes it takes decades to speak. But when someone remembers, when someone cares enough to search for 23 years, it proves that even in the darkest moments, human decency survives.